I still see the struggle that the black dancer goes through and the black actor goes through.
It was the first time Gregory and I ever felt what they all talk about, the audience's love for you. Boys, it hasn't changed at all.
A legend of tap dance for 7 decades has died. Maurice Hines gained fame with his brother Gregory.
Do you remember Maurice Hines? The man with the piercing eyes, the dignified stance, and a tap dance that could hypnotize an entire stage. He was the older brother of Gregory Hines, the star who once lit up Broadway. The man whom Black America once proudly called the last elegant gentleman of the golden era of black theater. But did you know he died alone in a nursing home with no will, no grand funeral, and no one came to claim his body for 2 days? Why didn't he attend his brother's funeral? Was it because Maurice Hines had spent his whole life living in the shadow of Gregory Hines? All the answers lie deep inside the mansion he once lived in, the Velvet House. Now it's just an abandoned home, chained shut with rusted links like a tomb standing in the middle of a wealthy neighborhood. And then, nearly 20 years after that door last closed, the city authorities were forced to break the lock and step inside. No one expected that what they would find wasn't just the dust of time, but the final traces of a forgotten life. On a bone-chilling Monday afternoon in February 2024, the city's property inspection team arrived at 127 Maple Avenue to document an abandoned estate. The 2-story colonial revival-style home spanned nearly 2,000 square feet, with 3 bedrooms, a high-ceilinged living room, and a hardwood tap floor once polished to a mirror finish. It once belonged to Maurice Hines Jr., a renowned tap dancer, Broadway stage director, and a man who had appeared on national television since the age of 10. He was the older brother of Gregory Hines, a Tony Award-winning star honored on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, celebrated across America as the tap dance icon of the 20th century. Few remember that it was Maurice who laid the very first stones in his younger brother's career. He was the one who took Gregory to his first dance class, the one who taught him his first steps on the kitchen floor in their Harlem apartment. But when Gregory went on to Hollywood and became the face of cinema, Maurice, the teacher, the guide, slowly stepped back behind the spotlight. In 1992, after leaving Broadway and ending a long string of tours, Maurice spent $145,000 to purchase that house. He called it the Velvet House, a place where he could live quietly, no longer someone else's shadow. In the upstairs bedroom, he hung an old wooden sign that read, "Dressing Room, Apollo Theater," a gentle reminder that once upon a time he had stood at center stage. But then, time passed. Neighbors said that since the summer of 2020, no one had seen him step outside. Only the sound of jazz music still echoed, the upstairs light still glowed each night, and there was a strange feeling, as if the house had never truly been empty. A real estate agent came to inspect it a few days earlier, then left in a hurry. He said he wasn't sure if he'd return because something was upstairs, very faint, very steady, as if someone was still tap dancing even though the house had long been abandoned. But the scariest part wasn't the sound. It was what no one knew, that inside that house, Maurice Hines had hidden a secret for 20 years, a secret he had never told anyone, not even his closest brother, Gregory. To understand why he needed to hide in that house during his final years, we have to go back to where it all began, in a cramped apartment in Harlem, a childhood marked by psychological scars that would follow him for the rest of his life. On December 13, 1943, in Harlem, New York City, right in the heart of the city that never sleeps, during a winter thick with the smell of heating oil and bus fumes, Maurice Robert Hines Jr. let out his first cry on the 3rd floor of a worn-down apartment building where the windows rattled every time the subway passed. Outside was a Harlem pulsing with jazz, tap dance, and life tangled in poverty. Inside was a black family clinging to dignity through art. His mother, Alma, wasn't the comforting type. She believed in a discipline harsher than any army. When Maurice was 6 and stumbled in his first tap class, she didn't hug him or say, "It's okay." She just looked at him, her eyes as hard as oak, and said, "You have to learn how to cry with your feet." From that day on, Maurice didn't cry anymore. But the studio floor remembered. It soaked in every stomp, every spin that tore his skin, every beat from a 6-year-old boy learning to brace himself so he wouldn't break. In the summer of 1954, Maurice was 10, Gregory was 8. The brothers performed at the Apollo Theater for the first time. Under blazing gold lights, in a room thick with breath and heat, Gregory danced like wind, fluid, natural, mesmerizing. Maurice was like a clock, precise, measured, nearly perfect. But that same night, Maurice realized perfection never beats charisma. Gregory rose to stardom, and he stepped back into the role of the background. And from that moment on, Maurice was no longer allowed to fall. Not because the stage demanded it, but because he was keeping time for someone else. And if he slipped, the world would come crashing down on his little brother. From 1955 to 1968, the Hines kids became one of the most famous tap dance duos in the black community. The two toured across America, from Chicago nightclubs and New Orleans theaters to the glittering stages of Las Vegas. They were living proof of something once thought impossible, that black performers could grace television screens, could own the stage. But light, when it shines too long on one side, leaves the other in darkness forever. Gregory, with his soft curls, bright eyes, and irresistible smile, always knew how to win over an audience. He seemed born to shine. His dancing wasn't polished in a textbook sense, but it carried feeling, rebellion, and a touch of wildness that left crowds breathless. Gregory could create moments that made the whole room rise to its feet, and he did it effortlessly. And Maurice? He stood by his brother like a steady frame, always keeping tempo, always anchoring the act. He was flawless to the beat, to each turn, each tap landing like a Swiss watch. But audiences don't remember the watch. They remember the chime. In 1957, when the brothers were invited to perform on The Ed Sullivan Show, one of the most popular TV shows in America, Maurice thought maybe this time they'll finally see him. And then the camera panned in, but it didn't land on Maurice. It always found Gregory, zooming in on his radiant smile, on his spontaneous spins. And after the show, the only thing the audience talked about was, who was that younger brother? No one remembered the one keeping time. From then on, something quiet began to form in Maurice, a fear that his existence was necessary, but never enough to be loved. Adolescence came like a double-edged sword. Gregory grew quickly, sharpening both his talent and magnetic charm. He began experimenting with unusual moves, breaking rhythms, breaking choreographic rules. The crowd loved it. Maurice? He stuck to the routine. That was how he was trained, and it was the role he was assigned. Keep Gregory safe in the art. Every rehearsal, their father, Maurice Sr., focused all his attention on Gregory. When the younger brother missed a beat, their father would just chuckle. But if Maurice slipped, even slightly, he would stop the music and make them start from the top. There were nights the three of them practiced until 2 a.m. just because Maurice couldn't please the two men in the room, his father and Gregory, the rising star in whom the family had placed all their bets. Then came 1963. Maurice was 20, Gregory 18. Their father officially joined the act, and the Hines kids became Hines, Hines, and Dad. To outsiders, it was the perfect model, an artistic family, 3 generations of men sharing the stage. But for Maurice, it was the last time he had space to breathe. His father was the controller, Gregory was the center, and Maurice was clearly caught between them, forced to keep tempo, to yield, to hold it all together. He was no longer an artist. He was the silent director in a show where he would never be the lead. As Gregory started dating, appearing at elite parties and getting chased by the press. Maurice was still in the studio, adjusting his posture, grinding down every step, making sure the next show wouldn't falter. He didn't dare rebel. He didn't dare stand out, because he knew, if he fell, Gregory would fall too, and that was something he would never let happen. Gregory began composing, writing lyrics, even venturing into acting. Every door opened before him. Maurice, each time he suggested something different, was shut down by their father. Gregory's doing fine, you just keep things steady. But everything shattered in July 1968 in Las Vegas. That night, Hines, and Dad were performing at a big event with TV reps and major producers in the audience. Maurice had carefully prepared a short solo, just a few counts, to open the show instead of always following Gregory. It was the first time he dared to ask for a change. But his father simply shook his head and said quickly, "Gregory opens. Don't mess up the formation." The words hit Maurice like ice water to the face. Gregory said nothing, didn't turn around. No one defended him, no one noticed. And Maurice knew, just like every time before, he was born to be behind. That night, he left the theater without a word. No one called, no one asked. He checked into a cheap motel nearby, drew the curtains, stood in front of the mirror, and didn't turn on the light. And then he danced. No music, no audience. Each tap of his foot was a release of anger, each spin a weary exhale. It was the first time he ever danced for himself, for no one else. And from that night on, a nameless dance began, one he would repeat for years whenever he was alone. Only alone. By 1973, Maurice was cast in the lead role of the Broadway musical Eubie. He thought, maybe this time they'll truly see me. Not as Gregory's older brother, but as himself, and the critics did praise him. But not long after, Gregory was cast in films, dropped albums, and appeared on TV. His face was everywhere. Maurice's name, if mentioned at all, was in a tiny corner with a short line. Solid performance, but not memorable. No one said he was bad, just that Gregory had more presence. And just like that, the spotlight returned to his brother, as if Maurice had never stood there at all. By 1976, Maurice began to disappear from major stages. No one invited him. No one mentioned him. He began teaching dance at a small high school in the Bronx. Each day, he'd teach his students. Each night, he'd lock the door, put on his familiar music, and perform his nameless dance. No one watched. No one clapped. On his old desk sat a notebook. The first page bore one sentence: "If I don't keep time, who will?" The last page, its strokes heavier, as if written in a sleepless night, read, "I've kept time for others all my life. But who will keep time for me?" No one ever read that notebook. No one asked if he was tired, if he was sad. Because to everyone, Maurice Hines was always the man behind Gregory. And the saddest part is, no one ever thought he deserved to shine too. In the summer of 1992, when he was in his 40s, Maurice Hines decided to leave behind the noisy pace of New York and move to the suburbs of East Orange, New Jersey. At the age when most artists began to live off nostalgia, Maurice was still quietly dancing every day and accepting teaching gigs at a few community centers. But inside, he was tired. Tired of holding up an image of discipline. Tired of always being remembered after someone else. So when he found the old two-story colonial revival house on Maple Avenue, he didn't hesitate long. The house was a bit run down, with original hardwood floors, arched windows, and a dusty attic room. Maurice bought it for $145,000 and named it the Velvet House, not because it was luxurious, but because he needed somewhere soft to breathe. He didn't hire anyone to redesign it, nor did he show it off to friends. Every nail, every new coat of paint on the doors, every mirror in the hallway was chosen by him alone. But the most special was the upstairs bedroom. Maurice removed a small, worn wooden sign that once hung backstage at the Apollo Theater, where he and Gregory first performed as children, and nailed it to the inside of his bedroom door. Beneath that sign, he hung an old, tarnished mirror, not to look into, but to remind himself that here, in this house, he was allowed to be himself, even if only behind an imaginary curtain. For more than a decade after that, the house became his place to retreat after each lesson, each time the world outside felt too loud to step into. He taught students on the ground floor, cooked in a crooked little kitchen with a slanted dining table, and practiced his unnamed dance every night on the wooden floors of the living room. But only he knew that the upstairs bedroom was where he truly ended each day, not to sleep, but to be still. No one was ever invited into that room. When students or colleagues visited, he would always smile and say, "That's the private room. That's the backstage. Then quietly closed the door. Only much later did the secret inside that room cause people to break. All the truth would be revealed in the final chapter of his life. On August 9, 2003, Gregory Hines passed away at the age of 57 from liver cancer. All of America mourned him. Television replayed his legendary performances. Newspapers ran his photo on the front page. Artists everywhere shared memories. Only one man remained completely silent: Maurice Hines. He didn't attend the funeral. He didn't send condolences. When he received the news from an acquaintance, Maurice just stood frozen, hand slack beside the phone. No one knew what went through his mind. But the next morning, all his bookings were canceled. His assistant withdrew from the job, and from that day on, Maurice Hines disappeared from major stages as if he had never existed. He returned to the old mansion in East Orange, locking himself inside the house he had once named the Velvet House. Back then, every room glowed with light, echoed with tap steps, jazz music playing from an old radio. But after Gregory's death, Maurice never turned on all the lights again. The house sank into a heavy darkness, mirroring the emptiness inside him. Only one place kept its light: the upstairs bedroom where he had nailed the dressing room Apollo Theater sign, as if clinging to one last memory. Next to the worn-out mirror, stuck to the refrigerator door, was a yellowed scrap of paper written in pencil: "Call Gregory, if still alive." No one knew when he wrote it. Maybe when Gregory went into the hospital. Maybe when no one answered the phone anymore. But clearly, for 20 years, Maurice never dared to take it down, as if removing it would mean accepting that his brother was truly gone. The loss triggered everything else. After 2010, his health declined. His teaching jobs faded, then stopped altogether. With no more income, his bank account dwindled. Bills stacked up. And to survive, Maurice began selling off pieces of his youth. In 2011, he sold the Cadillac Eldorado convertible, the car he and Gregory once drove around Harlem after a show. In 2014, the painting their mother had hung in the living room was taken down and handed to an antiques dealer. In the years after, he gradually sold off all his unused scripts, costumes, even the black suit he wore in Ubi, packed up and sent away. Eventually, even the piano, once played beside Gregory, once used to teach students key by key, was sold to a second-hand music store. Each item gone, each memory peeled away. The large house slowly turned empty, cold, filled only by the wind slipping through door cracks each night and the fading sound of weak tap shoes echoing in the worn-out studio. Maurice's dinners dwindled to cold porridge or a few slices of dry bread. The living room gathered dust. The curtains thickened. The chairs were covered in faded cloth. But one thing he never sold: a small wooden box with a locked clasp placed beneath the studio floor. The only person who ever asked about it was Gregory. Back then, Gregory had looked at the box and asked, "What's in there, Mo?" Maurice just gave a faint smile and said, "I'll tell you later." But that later never came. Gregory died, and the box remained, unopened, untouched. Maurice continued living in the mansion, surrounded by dusty memories and an unspoken regret he never dared to name. Every step he took in the house felt like walking on a stage with no spotlight. Every corner held a memory not yet closed. And the box beneath the floor remained a promise unfulfilled to the one person who had ever seen him not as a shadow. The one he had hoped to stand beside, equal. Two men on stage, not one leading, and the other simply keeping rhythm from behind. Because some things are never explained in time, and some people leave before we have the courage to say, "I miss you, I'm still here, you just never looked back." For years, people wondered why Maurice Hines, a famous, elegant, accomplished artist, never married. No one had ever seen him publicly holding anyone's hand at a party, no engagement, no wedding photos. He always showed up alone, neat, soft-spoken, discreet. Once, during a Broadway interview, a reporter casually asked about his love life. Maurice gave a gentle smile and said, "I've loved a lot. I just didn't know how to keep it." The truth is, he had loved. In 1986, after a performance of Uptown, "It's hot." In New York, Maurice met a young man, a Brazilian-born choreographer, full of dreams and passion. The two quietly spent nearly 3 years together. No announcements, no photos. It was one of the rare times in Maurice's life that he truly opened up. They danced in the mansion's basement, cooked meals, listened to music, sometimes walked through East Orange like an invisible couple. But in the early 90s, the young man left New York for a scholarship in Europe. There was no official goodbye, no promises, just no return. Maurice didn't ask, didn't blame. He just packed everything into a small wooden box, locked it, and placed it under the studio floor, a place no one would touch for 3 decades. The only person who ever asked about it was Gregory. Later on, there was one more fleeting relationship with a jazz singer from Detroit. But like before, no one knew how it ended. Maurice kept living alone, kept dancing alone, kept smiling when asked about love, as if it had never happened. But every night he turned on the kitchen light, set out 2 glasses on the table, even if he only used one. He never publicly said who he was in his private life. In a late interview, when asked, "Were you ever afraid of being judged?" Maurice simply looked straight into the camera and said softly, "I'm not afraid, I just don't want people to remember me wrong." His entire life, no one truly knew who he loved, what he lived for, and in the end, no one knew when he left. On December 29, 2023, on a bitterly cold morning in Englewood, New Jersey, a night shift nurse knocked on the door of room 212 at the Actors Fund Home Nursing Facility, but received no response. Inside, the lights were dim, the curtains were still drawn, and an old Ella Fitzgerald recording was still playing halfway through on a small bedside turntable. Maurice Hines lay still, his eyes closed, his hand resting gently on an old notebook that had no space left to write. His medical file stated simply, "Cause of death, natural, old age." No next of kin, no emergency contact. In the box labeled occupation, he left only one line, Maurice R. Hines, stage artist. There was no funeral, no one claimed the body, no announcement from major newspapers. Broadway said nothing. The Arts Center, where he once taught, didn't send a single farewell. Everything ended as lightly as a breeze no one noticed had passed. His entire file was sent to the legal department of the Actors Fund, marked as a no-air case. In truth, if everything had ended there, the name Maurice Hines might have vanished within weeks. But exactly 1 month later, when the fund's staff arrived to clear out the East Orange mansion in preparation for sale, they discovered a rusted padlock in the basement, hidden behind an old shoe rack. No one had the key. It took nearly 30 minutes to pry it open. Inside, they found a small room sealed in black fabric and soundproofing material, containing only a wooden chair, a cracked mirror, and an old tape recorder set on a shelf. No valuables, no will, no farewell letter. Just one recording button still left on. In February 2024, the Velvet House was officially listed on a local real estate website. The description was brief. 2 stories, 3 bedrooms, vintage style, needs renovation. But the agent added one line no one dared to question. A strange house. Some say they hear tap dancing at night. No one came to view it. No one asked for more details. And for 3 weeks, the house remained tightly closed, as if it didn't want to change hands. Everything left inside the house, from old costumes, lesson notebooks, to the sign that read, "Dressing Room, Apollo Theater," was boxed and sent to the Actors Fund archive. Each item was cataloged, coded, and placed in cold storage. Only one item wasn't on the inventory, the old tape left in the basement, buried under dust and wrapped in black velvet. When the archive staff played the tape, the first sound was the tap of shoes. Slow, weary, heavy. Then Maurice's deep sigh. And finally, a choked voice speaking like a lone monologue. "This is my final dance, not for Gregory, not for Broadway, but for the one who kept the rhythm his whole life and no one remembered his name." No one said anything afterward. No one knows if the tape was kept. But the person on duty that day quietly wrote in the report a single line, not part of any standard form. "We didn't find a will, but he left us a final word." and the house in East Orange still hasn't been sold to this day. They say every time it rains, the wood floor begins to tap, steady, soft, like someone is still dancing. So Maurice Hines lived his entire life in the role of timekeeper, never stepping forward, never stealing the spotlight, never making a scene. A meticulous, quiet artist who spent his life making sure others shined without ever asking, "But what about me?" He once had wealth, had fame, had a 2-story home called the Velvet House. But when he passed, no one came to claim the body. No funeral, no tribute. No one called his name again. Among the boxes of legacy sent to storage, no one found a will. No letter left for the world. Only an old tape, a locked wooden box, and a bedroom light that had stayed on for 20 years, as if to say someone had been here, and maybe was still waiting for someone to remember. Have you ever stood up and clapped for Gregory? Ever swayed to the tap rhythm on the Apollo stage without knowing who kept that rhythm alive from behind? If you've never heard of Maurice, you're not alone. But maybe it's time we admit, choosing to live quietly doesn't mean someone deserves to be forgotten. Leave a comment below to honor this silent artist, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to uncover the hidden stories of those who made legends possible.